everybody loved Chris Lofton so much, but you couldn't help ask why in his final season of eligibility, his senior season, why he wasn't the same Chris Lofton he was the year before. He didn't even take a step up. He didn't even stay even. I thought he came down a little bit as a player, and everybody's wondering why, and something's going on. And it was obvious just by his play, not by the rumor mill, because they kept it super tight. And they announced that he had testicular excuse me, testicular cancer, and that he had been playing with that all year, which is phenomenal to me. I wrote a column on Eric Berry, and if you've ever seen somebody go through chemo and cancer treatment, to imagine them being an elite athlete is just mind blowing. But he was still an all SEC top player. He just wasn't one of the very best players in the SEC. I think you would probably agree with that. So, and I remember them announcing that. Well, they will retire his number tomorrow. And he would have been one of the, just off stats alone, he would have been one of the top 5 players probably in Tennessee history. If you want to include Ernie and Bernie, Allen Houston, I'm going to leave somebody off, Caleb, but he would have been right there as far as most productive players because of what happened during his senior season. Probably not considered one of the most productive players, but the fact that he fought through that was just phenomenal. And he'll have his number retired at the Tennessee Kentucky game. And Caleb, you just can't help but respect that young man. Very quiet, wanted to keep it to himself. You know, people change over time, and I don't know your thoughts. If I had a life-threatening illness at this point in my life, you know, you would probably be one that would know, but it would be a very small group, and I would not want it to get out. Back then, for whatever reason, I thought, why wouldn't you want people to know and rally around you and have a reason why you're not playing as well as you were? Now I respect that in a different way, maybe with age, maturity, just a change of vantage point. But what do you remember about that? And when you think Chris Lofton, what do you think as he'll have his number retired tomorrow?
Yeah, it's funny you bring him up because if you remember that year, Bruce Pearl had two really good years before in 05, 06, 06, 07. And in 2007, 2008, in that all season, Tyler Smith transferred to Tennessee and got a hardship to play because his father was ill. And I remember we all were watching Chris Lofton, and what we all thought throughout the season was that Chris Lofton had not been able to adjust to Tyler Smith and the kind of change in pace with Tyler Smith, playing under the basket. Tennessee had really mediocre point guard play that year with Ramar Smith and Jordan Howell. And we thought that was the reason. And then you're right. The all season comes and we realize he had testicular cancer. And I mean, it's just an amazing story. And the crazy part is, here's how great he was. We're wondering why he had to step back that year. He still led the team in scoring at 15 and a half points a game. He shot 39% from 3. I mean, he was still like, that's a season that he led Tennessee to its first number 1 ranking, its first 30-win season ever. And we were all still wondering how he took a step back. That shows how great he was. I want to do a shout out real quick too, because Mike Wilson of Knox News has an article out right now about the story of Chris Lofton's recruiting. And we all know Kentucky didn't want him. Like Tubby Smith, one of the reasons we talked about John Calipari yesterday, and one of the reasons the calls were there for Tubby Smith was because he really just let Chris Lofton leave the state. But I don't know if we know this. I just read this, Dave. Did you know that the only reason Tennessee targeted Chris Lofton was because they had lost John Winchester, I think, to the portal, so they had an opening, and they would not have gone for Chris Lofton had it not been for John Winchester. So I'm not here to give Buzz Peterson too much credit for landing Chris Lofton. Chris Lofton fell out of the sky into his lap. And it's one of those situations where he fell out of the sky and he really helped Bruce Pearl those first couple of years. I think Tennessee still would have been successful because Bruce Pearl was introducing that press defense and the flex offense, and nobody in the SEC was running that at the time. But Chris Lofton helped that a lot. Helped Bruce Pearl make an early splash.
Agreed. And Jawan James, right?
Juwan Smith.
Jawan Smith. I'm sorry. Jawan James was the offensive lineman. Jawan Smith was the other guy. Let's not forget on that Pearl team, and Pearl is a better X's and O's guy than people like to say because he is a showman. He's one of those guys that has style but has substance, and he's a great coach. But let's not forget when he was having success at Tennessee, he had two great shooters, not good shooters, great shooters, and that certainly helps win you a lot of games that you probably wouldn't have won otherwise. Be sure and hit that like button. We got some new people jumping on, and we appreciate that. And if you're just jumping on the beginning of the program, we break down Tennessee's official visitors, not official, but they're visitors for Junior Day this week, and it's a pretty strong group. And I look back at what he went through, and there's just no way that a vast number of days that he wasn't sick or ill from the treatment. Not to mention that he had to have an amputation with testicular cancer. Just all of that and going through a college football season to me is phenomenal. I'm a hypochondriac. I would have been the one that wanted to just lay on the bed and until I was 100% clear, then we'll go back to playing basketball. And he could have redshirted that year if he wanted to, but he didn't. I didn't know that story about John Winchester. There are a lot of guys, Isaiah Victor would be one, that Kentucky turns their back on, and they immediately want to go to Tennessee because Tennessee is second in all-time wins in basketball in the SEC. They're second in all-time wins in football to Alabama. So I think there's a natural when those two programs say you're not good enough that Tennessee's the place to go. Now, he may have had a fantastic career at Kentucky. He may have won a championship. I doubt it, but may have. But what he did at Tennessee was make an impact. And we talk about NIL and all that. I'm aware of some job opportunities that Chris Lofton has been offered. He never has to hurt for a good job in Knoxville if he wants one. I mean, a significantly good job. That's how beloved he is. So if you go back over the past 15 years, when was his final year at Tennessee?
2008.
2008.
0708.
So let's go back over the last 15 years. As far as a football player out of that group, who is more beloved? Now, that would have been Eric Berry's final year because football players always have a step up, right? You've got to be
It would have been Eric Berry's second year.
Or second to last year.
Yeah, second to last year.
Or second year either way. He played 3 years.
Yeah.
Sorry. But so it would have been Eric Berry's second year. So let's include him in the list. So if you're football, you automatically have a nudge up in Tennessee, and you always will, just like Duke basketball will have a nudge up. Yeah, there are basketball players at North Carolina that are more beloved right now than Drake May at quarterback, and he's probably the best NFL prospect walking the earth. So that's just the way things work. It's a football school. What players since 98 would you describe as more beloved than Chris Lofton just because they played football? I'm going to say Eric Berry because he did overcome cancer. He did overcome 2 huge injuries in the NFL. He did everything he could in a program that was falling apart. And so I think he's right up there with the elite, like just maybe short of Peyton Manning. And I wrote a column about that on Off the Hook Sports. What players in that time frame, given the dormancy and given the fact that Lofton made such a huge impact since 2008, what athlete's more beloved than those two guys? Is there one?
Those are the top 2. I think there are 3 close ones to them in football. I think in football you have Jawan Jennings, because I think just people who Jawan Jennings, Tennessee, he called the Hail Mary to beat Georgia in 2016, and he was such a vocal leader. And I've never seen a player He was so beloved. He went on Instagram and cussed out the coaches, Butch Jones and the Brady Hoke staff, and talked about them using a lot of profanity on Instagram, got kicked off, and all of Tennessee and Vol Nation begged for him to be reinstated. Everybody sided with Juwan Jennings over the coaching staff.
But see, I can't get beyond that. So I respect your opinion there. I wouldn't have him even in my top 10 because of that. I think that even though he came back and he righted the ship, that's a weird sort of betrayal to the.
I think everybody sided. I don't think it was. I think everybody sided with Juwan Jennings, though, because we all knew that the Butch Jones coaching staff were liars. They were constantly lying to us. And so
I agree. But I mean, to me, that just doesn't sit right. Okay. So if we're talking about that time frame, Hendon Hooker has to be up there.
Yeah, I was going to say Hendon Hooker. And I was going to say maybe Josh Dobbs, because Hendon Hooker and Josh Dobbs are just two great guys who were also great quarterbacks for Tennessee. And
I think, to me, that's your 4, and then there's a drop off.
Yeah,
but you would have Jennings up there in that.
I would actually, yeah, because he was one of those. He was that emotional leader. By the way, Dave, you know this because you covered him. The funny thing, we talk about this, the most talented quarterback to play for Tennessee since then is Tyler Bray, and nobody respects Tyler Bray at all. Worst intangibles of any quarterback ever to play at Tennessee. Yeah. And
it's really tough to have bad intangibles as a quarterback and be beloved. If you want to give us your thoughts on the message board, maybe we're missing somebody. Cheese, no. Travis Henry is not in that time frame, Travis. We're just going back to 2008. That's a whole different group that bumps some people down the list pretty quickly if we go back to 98. We're just going back to 2008.
I would push back, by the way, and say that I think Chris Lofton is in the top 5 of Tennessee basketball history. I think if you're doing an all-time starting lineup, Chris Lofton is there.
Oh, I did too. Yeah. No, I definitely do. So top 5: Ernie, Bernie,
Dale Ellis, Chris Lofton, and I'm going Grant Williams.
Ooh, how do you leave off Houston?
Because I'm putting Chris Lofton in over Houston. I think Allen Houston's a better NBA player, but I think Tennessee never even had a winning season with Allen Houston.
Well, but you and I could have played for those teams. They were so bad. They were so bad.
Yeah, but you know this, Dave, like in college basketball, and this is why I call Ben Simmons being a loser in the NBA. I've said in college basketball, one player can make a team good in college basketball, an NCAA tournament caliber. You just need one transcendent recruit can make a team NCAA tournament caliber in college basketball. And Allen Houston didn't even get Tennessee close those years. But look,
but you say one player, you've got to at least have 4 average to slightly below average, right?
So, are you saying they were worse than below average, the rest of those players?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay, that's transcendently awful.
Well, and you had a coach that instead of watching game tape would watch soap operas during the day.
Oh, I did not know that.
Wade Houston loved watching soap operas.
Well, wasn't he hired just to get Allen Houston?
Yes.
And
Wade Houston was Kentucky's ace recruiter. And so they go get him. And had he had a head coach and been Tennessee's ace recruiter, they would have been just fine because they would have gotten Allen Houston and other dudes. But Tennessee's had a couple of people that they just kind of said, this is enough money and this is it. And Wade Houston went on to trucking. Jerry Green got a lot of money and went on to retirement. And they did not feel like they were driven to have success at Tennessee. That's just a fact.